And now for letter 20 of the Screwtape Letters. These letters follow on the other ones, so continuing to talk about sexuality and love and Wormwood's attacks on the patient's chastity. One of the titles I thought of for this one is The Terrestrial and Infernal Venus, and we'll go through those distinctions and how Lewis, through Screwtape, addresses those in this letter. So, first it starts out with God putting an end to Wormwood's direct attacks on the patient's chastity. So he's not able to use some of the things, Wormwood's not able to use that Screwtape told him to use in the last letter. So they're trying to figure out what they can do. It says that they've lost the demon's best weapon, which is when people think the only way to get rid of a demon is by yielding to them. How there's power for them in that we think, oh, if I just give in to this temptation, then the demon will leave me alone. Definitely not true. They'll continue to seek us after that, and so that is a great weapon for them to have. Screwtape now wants a report on the young women in the neighborhood, that should be plural, to try to figure out how, if they can't use his sexual desire for unchastity, then how to manipulate a marriage for evil. So he wants to use his sexuality for a desirable marriage. Desirable for demons, aka would be a miserable marriage for actual humans. So let's jump into some of the things that they talk about. They plan the physical type of woman that the patient should, quote unquote, fall in love with. But they do talk about how, to a certain extent, that's not decided by them. It is decided by the lowerarchy. Now, again, it's a flipping of the hierarchy of the church. So the lower you are, the more power you have, just like in the flipped hierarchy, right? The higher you go, the closer you are to God, the more kind of power and glory you have with him. So through these lowerarchy, these lower demons produce the misdirection of sexual taste through artists, dressmakers, actresses, and advertisers. So Screwtape here is positing that it's actually demons working through, let's say, like popular society at that time to produce who they say is fashionable, who they say what type of people we should like or have this sexual taste for. It says their aim is to guide each sex, so male and female, away from those who would actually help them grow spiritually and lead them to happy and fertile marriages. So to lead them away from that into the opposite, who would lead them into those kind of perversions of sexuality. They make secondary characteristics more important than primary ones. So again, if we're trying to look for someone who's actually going to help us grow spiritually, some primary things we look at is their own spiritual life, right? Their own kind of stability, their own intellectual, emotional, spiritual maturity and whatnot. But instead of looking at kind of like who the people are, demons want us to look at the secondary characteristics of like what they would look like. So kind of the more like shallow exterior. Again, not saying that those things aren't important, right? Sexual attraction is important for a marriage, but that's not the most important thing. So they give some examples, and this is right from an English perspective in around the time of World War II. And so it says, for the male, such as the beard. So at that time in England, beards were disagreeable in males, so that females would be not attracted to men with beards. Again, that's not necessarily the case today or in different situations. And I'm not just saying that because my husband has a beard, right? That's, again, their tastes have obviously changed. And then it talks about in females, they've gone through different stages of what is attractive. So I thought this was interesting. They just kind of outline a few, but we know that, and all of you who studied history and art have been able to see that what people have thought is attractive, and especially women, has changed vastly over time. I would definitely say men as well, but particularly for women, we are the more beautiful sex. So throughout time, they used to have statuesque and aristocratic beauty that would mix men's vanity with their desires and encouraging the race to breed chiefly from the most arrogant and prodigal women. So kind of having this different kind of worldly positions or airs or whatnot about them. Then they moved to a exaggeratedly feminine type, faint and languishing, so that folly and cowardice and all the general falseness and littleness of mind which go with them shall be at a premium. So then they went through this time of exaggerated femininity, so faint languishing that men would have to folly and cowardice would go hand in hand with as they were trying to get these women to be with them or whatnot. It says at present we are on the opposite tack. The age of jazz has succeeded the age of the waltz, and we now teach men to like women whose bodies are scarcely distinguishable from those of boys. Since this is a kind of beauty even more transitory than most, We thus aggravate the female's chronic horror of growing old, with many excellent results, and render her less willing and less able to bear children. And that is not all. So right now, at least at this time that he's speaking about, women are attractive. The secondary characteristics we desire them to have are bodies similar to that of boys. It says they've also increased license, which allows the representation of the apparent nude, not the real nude, in art and its exhibition on the stage or the bathing beach. It is all a fake, of course. The figures in the popular art are falsely drawn. The real women in bathing suits or tights are actually pinched in and propped up to make them appear firmer and more slender and more boyish than nature allows a full-grown woman to be. So even at this time, even before I would say internet and computers and Photoshop, they still would kind of accentuate or aggravate certain parts of a woman or pictures or art or whatnot to make this type of desire in man that is ultimately unattainable, right? So something that a female body cannot actually look like as what they think is most beautiful and what every woman should try to attain. It says, they're more and more directing the desires of man to something that does not exist. So this is the goal of the lowerarchy of demons, to manipulate sexual tastes of men and women to something that is, again, not the most important characteristics of a person, but kind of more outward in appearance, and then to make those very shallow. And then the last part he talks about is this terrestrial and infernal Venus. It says, you will find if you look into any human's heart that he is haunted by at least two imaginary women. For girls, I would say that'd be opposite, two imaginary men. A terrestrial and an infernal Venus. So terrestrial just means earthly. Venus, throughout history and mythology, being kind of like this beautiful woman, this god, female god. And so it says his desires differ qualitatively according to its object. So for a terrestrial or earthly Venus, this desire for her is naturally amenable to God and his desire for us. So a man kind of admiring the type of woman that God designed him to admire. Right, so readily mixed with charity, readily obedient to marriage, colored all through with that golden light of reverence and naturalness which we detest. So if humans detest it, okay, that means it's good. Right? Then it says there is another type which he desires brutally. So this is going to be the infernal Venus. So he desires her brutally, and desires to desire brutally. Right? Desires to desire brutally. A type best used to draw him away from marriage altogether, but which even within marriage he would tend to treat her as a slave, as an idol, or as an accomplice, right? So he talks about these two different desires in man, how part of us, or I would say for women, that like we desire like a good man who would, provide stability and, is attractive and kind and whatnot. But there's also kind of this, like, I would kind of phrase it more as like, an attraction to like a bad guy or like a bad girl or, something that's within us. And I would say more of maybe like animalistic tendencies that part of us like desire a person who is kind of on that fringe, that kind of into more of those like, brutish animal desires. And so it says for the second type, the felt evil is what he wants. So the first type, there might be evil that goes into that first desire for an earthly man or woman, but more of like an evil like, I would wish that man not be with another woman, or a guy would wish that girl not be with another guy. So only secondary. But in the second type, in the infernal Venus, that the felt evil is what we want, right? We want that tang, the flavor, the visible animality or sulkiness or craft or cruelty, which we like in the other person. So it says, the real use of the infernal Venus is no doubt as a prostitute or as a mistress. But if your man is a Christian and he has been well trained in nonsense about irresistible and all-excusing love, he can often be induced to marry her. So again, if we talk about that, like, well, I love her, if love is my highest good and feeling in love or being in love, that I will marry this person who maybe isn't the best for me or who doesn't bring out the best for me or who I wouldn't treat as an equal. So they can either use her, prostitute mistress, or try to get the patient to marry this woman.